Welcome back to Combat Sports, and today we have some breaking news because last night Jon Jones asked to be released from the UFC. And I think this came to a surprise to everyone really, because Jon Jones was meant to fight at the White House and he had spoken very openly about it, done interviews, said he was in negotiations, as he said, with the UFC for the White House card, and nothing came through from that. But these things kind of make you left thinking, what is actually going on? Because Jon Jones wanted to fight. He wanted to fight Alex Pereira. He didn't want to fight Tom Aspinall. I think we all know that one. But he wanted to fight on that White House card. So I don't know what's going on with Jon Jones, but we're going to take a little look into it. Alright, here we have Jon Jones's, rampage of tweets from last night. He said, the first tweet says, "I am released from the UFC, ? So that's obviously, I think, his first reaction to Dana White saying that he isn't in the UFC anymore and he isn't going to fight. Then he said, "Let's go. I would have proved him wrong. Would I be wrong? Or if I would prove him wrong, would I be wrong? Or would be a bigger man remaining silent? I'll be the fool guy, sure. Make this make sense. So all of this negotiation was complete. Is this what you want me to agree to publicly?" Which is a bit of a weird comment to make, because it seems that there were negotiations happening, and it seems that I think Dana White is just so uninvolved in the UFC, and it's so obvious nowadays. He's just a figurehead. He's just the guy that started it, now, and because obviously everything's, run by Hunter Campbell, and, I'm just not a fan of how the UFC is, progressing into this new era. And, I think we all just missed the good old days. Anything prior UFC 250 was pretty good. So, but then he also says here, "Man, how painful. Laying in my bed, wrapping my head around this. All I can think is." The thing is, I think Jon Jones is just really upset here, and then he goes on the end. And then the other half of me is like, but is this really though? John, what is really? What are you on about? Because, yeah, Dana White came out and said it, He literally just, he got asked a question, said it straight to them. And there's no any marketing move here or anything like that. Because he came out and said you had arthritis. He said you ain't going to be fighting anymore. That's a bit of a dig. And here we have a video, a little clip short from the Bleacher Report. So shout out to them guys, because they were on this like a car bonnet when it got posted out, and they literally got it out within a couple seconds, well, literally about 30 seconds to a minute of it being said. But yeah, this is what they said, and this is what Dana White said.
Ever, which I told you guys 100,000 times, was Jon Jones even remotely in my mind to fight at the White House. Some guy with, meta glasses on filmed him talking about his hips, that his hips are so bad. And I don't know if you guys saw that flag football game where he can barely run. Jon Jones he retired because of his hips. He's got arthritis in his hips.
This is just one big dig.
Doctors say he should have hip replacement. The Jon Jones thing is bullshit. I'm not saying they weren't talking to Jon Jones and that Jon Jones wasn't interested in the fight. And what was even crazier is Jon Jones came out and was like, "I'm in negotiations right now for the White House fight," after I had already sent a text to his lawyer saying, "Never going to happen ever."
Is it fair to say then Jon Jones is retired and this is the end of his time?
Yes. Okay. Very fair.
Was Jon
That is mental. To say that he's retired and got arthritis, I think Jon Jones has 2 fights left in him. Because I think he's done everything he needs to do in his career. Honestly, I'm loving the DC versus Jones little fight thing that they got going on with their camps and, they're training people. I've seen clips of it everywhere. It looks really good. I should probably start watching it because it looks that good. So I think Jon Jones has a very prosperous career away from the UFC, but I think he maybe has 1 or 2 fights left in him. I think there's probably a reason he doesn't want to go for the Tom Aspinall fight, and I think it's because of his arthritis. I think he knows that the younger guy is going to be more agile, and Tom is very agile, very quick, whereas Jon is, getting on a little bit. He's got arthritis. Not to say he couldn't still, mess someone up, because he really, really could. He could mess anyone up. I'm just saying, I think in a sport like the UFC, he was the young bull at one point. You know, you look at his early fights, like I would be scared of him. He was like, he had that kind of like Mike Tyson, like badass. You know, like he's like gonna be great. Like at such a young age, you're watching him going like, this guy's the next best thing. You know. And I think John Jones knows that Tom Aspinall has that kind of oomph around him. You know, A, because he's a lot younger, but B, I just think, Tom hasn't had, the kind of fights that, John's had in his career. You know, John went through some wars in his time. So I can see why they're saying this. But personally, I think John should come back for 2 more fights. I think maybe do the Alex Pereira, because that's not going to be as fast and quick pace as a Tom Aspinall fight. And I think maybe, just do like a kind of legacy fight. I think maybe bring someone back, maybe do something with DC again. I think that could be pretty good, because DC's, around the same age. So, I think they could have like a legacy fight together and just, call it a day after that, shake hands at the end. They had a really good rivalry. So I think that is what John should do. And just lastly, to add on, obviously, this is why I think the UFC is over. It is because Dana White has lost control of the company. He's not lost control, he's given away control. Okay, there's a difference. He's wanted to get to the point where he can just go off and do the power slap thing, Zuffa boxing, because he's always wanted to be a boxing promoter. That's what he tried doing in the first place. I think everyone forgets that. So, I think, Dana White, go off and do boxing, but I think you need to have a good hand and control over the UFC, and to make the fights that we were seeing back before 250, some really good matchups really consistently and like often. And you see Eddie Hearn said here, he nearly falls off his chair apparently, after finding out the details of Tom Aspinall's UFC career. He said Tom Aspinall should be getting paid over 10 times what he's getting paid at the moment in the UFC. And if you just do a little read through here, it is just crazy. Obviously they said here, when it was involved with Zuffa boxing, Sonny Conor Ben, they tasked obviously helping UFC fighters and other people in their position, to have someone actually looking out for them, which I think is a great move, because Tom Aspinall should be getting paid like really high numbers, because the draws that he brings in a lot of people, and the UFC are not making a good job of building him into their next big superstar heavyweight champion. And they put a lot of time into McGregor. They're not doing that for anyone else anymore, which is fair enough. They might just go off and do your own thing, you build yourself, which is fair enough. But Tom Aspinall, he needs a lot more recognition than he's getting at the moment. And I think this is why it's the beginning of the end of the UFC, because they're not getting paid anything, really. They're getting paid peanuts compared to boxers. McGregor's been going on about how much he will be worth in this current climate. Then it gets to, obviously, Tom Aspinall. What is he getting paid? Because I want to know. Something tells me it's nothing more than $2 million a fight. And I think even Tom might even react to this and go, mate, I love $2 million a fight, because I don't even think half the time he's gotten paid that. So let me know what you think in the comments. Is the UFC over? I think it is. I think it's the beginning of the end. I think, you can't, there's so many fighters on that roster that you would have to increase their pay, and I think they'd end up, having to chuck out a load of money. And I don't think they want to do that. I don't think Hunter Campbell or Dana White want to, take a little chunk out of their salary. And I think, there's arguments for that and against that, and I think I just want to know what you guys think, because at the end of the day, I think this whole situation with the UFC, Eddie Hearn getting involved now, helping, Tom Aspinall, I think this is going to be a very common occurrence for 2026, and I think the UFC by the end of 2026 will have a lot of their big stars signed to other companies. And, Tom Aspinall said he wants to go into boxing at some point, because you get paid a lot more. So, do you know what? I can start to see, Eddie Hearn picking up fighters, running them through to the end of their contract while he manages them, then goes, come on, guys, let's go over to boxing to make some real money. Because obviously that's what they want to do. They want to make some real money. They're putting their health at risk every single time they step in there. So, he needs to get paid the right amount of money. I think also he needs to, Eddie Hearn needs to go off and go grab every single fighter that he can that is having problems like this. I think it'd be quite entertaining to see Conor McGregor getting managed by Eddie Hearn. I think that would be a good shout because, I think Dana's going to turn to Conor and go, mate, I'm not going to pay you anywhere near what Conor Ben's gotten. And Conor's going to be like, who the fuck is that guy? Like how are you paying him more than me, And I think Dana's reaction is going to be like, well, we're getting more investment in boxing, and I think he's trying to wangle his way out of a lot of conversations, and I think a lot of UFC fighters are getting pissed off with him now, and I think that they're going to want to look for other avenues to make money. But thank you very much for watching, and make sure to subscribe if you haven't already, because we're pumping out a lot more content now. We've got a big team growing, and there's a lot of people who are, wanting to give you guys updates, content, point of view, stuff like that. So if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and check us out on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. Thank you very much. Bye.